Hi friends, I'm so glad you could join me for another Bible story this Sunday. I've got my Bible here because this story is pretty long. Last Sunday I told you the story of Joseph and how he had been sold by his brothers to some traders who were on the way to Egypt. Well, first of all, they threw him in a pit. But then they took him out of the pit and they sold him. And they took his fancy coat and they dipped it in goat's blood and they brought it to their father so that their dad would think that Joseph had been eaten up by a wild animal. But it wasn't true. They'd sold him. I sure hope you didn't sell any of your siblings last week. It's really not a good idea. So they sold their brother. And they sold him to some traders, and those traders were on their way to Egypt. And when they got to Egypt, they sold Joseph to a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the king of Egypt. So Joseph was sold into a really important household. And Joseph was a pretty gifted guy. He was a leader, and he had lots of talents. And God was with Joseph. And so when he was in Potiphar's house, Joseph worked really hard, and he actually became the head of the household. Potiphar trusted him so much that Joseph became the head of the household. Well, one day Joseph was working in the house when someone from Potiphar's household wanted Joseph to do something he knew was wrong, and he refused to do it. So that person got Joseph into a ton of trouble. And Joseph got stuck in jail. The person lied about him, but it didn't matter. That person had a lot of power. So Joseph got stuck in jail. And he was put in the jail with all of the king's prisoners. And God was still with Joseph. God was with Joseph, and he was still wise, and he was still gifted, and he was still a good leader. And so after a while in the jail, the chief jailer noticed that Joseph was a really good leader. And so he began putting all of the other prisoners under Joseph's care. He was in charge of all of the other prisoners. And he did that for quite a while. He looked after the other prisoners. And so he did pretty well in jail, which is kind of strange to think about. So after some time, 2 more prisoners came to the jail. And they were Pharaoh's baker and Pharaoh's cupbearer. Cupbearer and baker were really, really important jobs, and they had to be super trustworthy because lots of times people were trying to poison Pharaoh. So your baker and your cupbearer, the one who delivered your wine, they had to be really trustworthy. Well, the baker and the cupbearer did something or other to make Pharaoh angry, so he tossed them in prison. And one night, the baker and the cupbearer, they each had a dream. And if you remember, Joseph was a dreamer. When these 2 woke up from their dreams, they were really troubled and they didn't know what to do. And Joseph found them and saw that they were really upset and said, what's wrong? What's going on with you? And they told Joseph all about their dreams. And Joseph told them what their dreams meant, what was going to happen. And it came true, exactly as Joseph said it was going to. And the baker, he ended up dying, but the cupbearer, he ended up returning to Pharaoh and serving Pharaoh again. And then he totally forgot about Joseph in jail. 2 years passed. Joseph's been in jail this whole time. He's been in the prison and doing pretty well for himself in jail. When Pharaoh has a dream, 2 dreams actually. One night Pharaoh went to sleep and he dreamt that 7 fat, healthy cows came up out of the Nile River. And then 7 skinny, scrawny cows came up out of the river. And those 7 scrawny cows, they swallowed up the 7 fat, healthy cows. Gross! Pharaoh woke up startled, very disturbed. What on earth was this dream about? Eventually he fell back asleep, but he had a second dream. He dreamt that there were 7 healthy, strong stalks of grain that grew up in a field. And right after them were 7 scrawny stalks. And those healthy stalks had 7 fat ears of grain. And the scrawny stalks had 7 skinny, icky kind of ears of grain. But those 7 skinny ears, they swallowed up the 7 fat ears. Pharaoh woke up again, totally startled. He wanted to know, what do these dreams mean? So Pharaoh called all of his magicians and all of his wise men and said, please tell me, what do these dreams mean? But nobody could tell him. They had no idea what to do with Pharaoh's dreams. Well, the cupbearer, who had forgotten all about Joseph until that moment, overheard. And he went to Pharaoh and said, you know what? Do you remember when you put me in prison? Well, I had a dream when I was in prison, and there's a guy in the jail named Joseph. He told me what the dream meant, and it came true exactly as Joseph said. So Pharaoh got super excited, and he called Joseph to come into his throne room. So they cleaned Joseph all up, they shaved him and gave him a haircut, gave him some new clothes, and brought him before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said, I have heard that you know how to interpret dreams. Tell me, what does this dream mean? He said, I went to sleep and I dreamt there were 7 fat cows that came up out of the Nile River, and then 7 skinny cows, and those 7 skinny cows swallowed up the 7 fat cows. And I woke up, but then I went to sleep and I dreamt again. There were 7 big, thick stalks of grain that grew with 7 fat, healthy ears, and then 7 scrawny stalks with 7 scrawny ears, and those scrawny ears swallowed up all of the fat ears. Tell me, what does this mean? And Joseph said to him, well, Pharaoh, these dreams, they're one and the same. They mean that this country of Egypt is going to have 7 amazing years, 7 bountiful years with great harvests. The flocks will flourish. Everything will be amazing for 7 years. But then there are going to be 7 terrible years. 7 years of famine, where none of the food will grow, and there'll be starvation, and the animals won't thrive. It'll be 7 really bad years. So Pharaoh, you better get your house in order. You're going to need an overseer who's going to be able to figure this all out. Figure out how to store up enough grain to keep everyone fed during those 7 lean, horrible years. Otherwise, people are going to die. Well, Pharaoh looked at Joseph and thought, wow, this guy's wise. He knows what he's talking about. So Pharaoh decided that Joseph was going to be the best person to lead them during this time. So he made Joseph the overseer of all of Egypt. He was second in command only to Pharaoh. God was with Joseph. God was taking care of him, and Joseph was using all of his gifts of leadership, and so Joseph became second in command to Pharaoh. And he did some really hard work. They built extra granaries, and during those 7 years of really good crops, those 7 years came, just as Joseph said. They stored up lots and lots of grain in preparation for the 7 lean years. And then the 7 lean years came. It became dry, and nothing grew, and there was no food to be had. And that's where I'm going to leave our story for today. And we'll finish the story of Joseph and his brothers next Sunday. Before we go, I'd like to bless you. If you're sitting with someone else, you can take your palm and place it on their arm or on their shoulder. And if you're by yourself, you can take your palm and put it over your heart. May God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine on you and be gracious to you. And may the love of God flow over and all around you and give you peace. I'll see you next Sunday.